Okay, welcome to my video. Here we're going to be repivoting this balance, and what I'm doing here is using a stone to flatten out the end of the balance where the pivot broke off. So I'm trying this new pivoting tool. I made a video on it. As you can see in my my tailstock, I've got this tool shoved in there. You can look at my previous video to see how this thing works, because I did a video on this, but people were saying, hey buddy, I love your video, but actually do a repivot with it now and see what's going on. So here I'm aligning this up here, trying to align the actual tool rest here so I can see if I can center. I need to make a center on the on that balance staff, so you can file it flat and then center it. That way the drill finds center. So he's just farting around here with the tip over tool rest to make sure it's sized right so that the graver is hitting the exact center, and I'm using a pointed carbide graver to do this. This is a Lampart lathe, and as you can see, there's little oil caps on the right hand side on the top of the lathe, and they're filled with oil to make sure that the cone bearing has got enough oil in it and you don't have an issue. It's a beautiful little lathe. It's all metal, which is great, because sometimes the spindle isn't metal. Sometimes it's sort of a plastic kind of composite material, but whatever they had back in 1920. Maybe they didn't have composites in 1920, right? So I'm just centering this. So this is tricky. You got to get really close and make sure you don't screw up the center, because the drill bit will be looking for center, and if you don't find center properly, I got my extra magnifying glasses I'm going to put on here, and if the drill bit doesn't find center properly, then you've got a problem. It'll crack the bit or wobble or something like this. So the cool part of this whole drill configuration is that there's a plate on the left hand side, and there's various sizes that are around that circular plate in the tailstock, and I picked the size that's appropriate for the diameter of the balance staff. And I make sure my drill bit goes through that hole all the way. That way there it is there. Make sure that drill bit goes through the hole. So I had to take it off the lathe bed, get it the heck out of the way, because I needed to get in nice and tight to make a center hole here. So here we go, just spinning this lathe. Also, I made a belt for this lathe because it had the old whatever they're called, plastic belts you can buy. You buy them off AliExpress or whatever, or Amazon, and then you glue them together. As you can see right there, you can see the seam I made, which is a fishing line. So just like in my previous video, so I sized it, made the fishing line seam, and then I attached it. And this is in a Burrell stand, but I don't have a countershaft with this particular lathe. But the reason I'm using this Lampart lathe is that this pivoting tool, 7mm diameter with an 8mm sleeve on it that I purchased and showed you in the previous video, it fits absolutely perfect. So this lathe will be the one that I use to repivot balance staffs. So we'll just keep going here. I'll get the tip over tool rest again, and then trying to adjust it so this thing actually falls down and gets the heck out of the way. Before I had the tool rest over too much, so just using the bottom, my fingers on the bottom to tighten that and get out of the way. And on this lathe here too, the headstock is bolted to the lathe bed, so you normally have a little lever on the back. So there we go. See all those different positions? I picked the one with that was perfect for this particular balance staff, and then and that the drill bit would fit through. That's the important part. Okay, now the technique here is that I'm as you can see, the tailstock is not on the lathe bed right now. I didn't realize that, and I'm like, what's going on here? This thing is not lining up properly like it should. It should be absolutely aligned. And I figured I'd be tightening it and then it would line, and I realized, okay dummy, it's not even on the lathe bed. Try again, and don't tell your friends what you just did. It's very embarrassing. Very embarrassing. I'm excited. I'm really excited. My granddaughter said that once. So there I did. I slid it in. I'm like, oh my God, it matches up. And when I and remember that PCB drill I'm using here that I put an MT3 taper on that drill so I could stick it into the plunger and get that in there properly. So just moving the camera around so it'll give you a better view of things. See if I can do this so it's more exciting. I'm telling you, it's so exciting. There we go. That's a bit better. I should have turned my camera off before I did it. Now you see the tip of that drill sticking through that hole there? The end of the balance staff will actually go in where that coned hole is. And then the drill will still be in there just a bit, and it'll meet up with that balance staff, and that's how it drills the hole. So there we go. So I push it forward, and once I've got that all the way forward, it's pushing the drill bit back. If you can watch that really carefully, you can see the drill bit and its holding device there going back. And once I've got it back there in place, I know I've got it snug in there. And now I've got the everything is aligned perfectly. So now when I need to put some cutting oil on that too. So the only thing about this MT3 taper on this drill bit that I put in there is that I got to use my tweezers to lift it up because it stays a little bit loose, and then once it's in place it's fine, right? It works perfectly. So as you can see, so it's spinning there and there's no issue at all. And now I've got to just work on this thing and start cutting. All right, now we've got to get some cutting fluid. As you can see, there it is there, Mybro cutting fluid. So without cutting fluid, it doesn't work too well. I've tried it before, but you've got to put a little bit of cutting fluid. So here I just get the cutting fluid at the right angle, and I got a little tiny bit on the drill bit, and that's all I really need. Later on, I actually put the cutting fluid on the balance staff, which seems to hold better, and it goes into the hole, and then it works a lot better. So you got to cut in and then move out. Now here I'm just taking that drill bit here, because that drill bit is just friction fit onto the push bar, or the push bar, I guess that's what I can call it there. So it's just a friction fit on there, but you know what? It works really well. There was no issue at all doing this. And I'm just showing you how I'm aligning that up. So I have to just basically make sure that's perfectly aligned and in the hole. And then I can, when I spin the lathe here, I just apply pressure to the drill bit from the back of the whatever it's called. Oh, I gotta say the term, the thingamajobby doohickey is what I'm pushing on the end there on the tailstock. So I'm just putting a little pressure from the tailstock to spin it forward. Now these bits, if you leave them just looking like drill bits, they'll work, but they dullin pretty fast. And so, or they get dull. Dullin, I'm not sure if dullin is a word, but I can invent words. So I'm just going to switch glasses here, and I was really worried about protecting my eye in case that drill bit just flew out on me. It didn't break, so it was wonderful. So it did drill a little bit of the hole, which is nice. And I found that if you take a diamond plate and you file the end of that drill bit to be kind of square, right, which is weird, but just like file it to look like a screwdriver blade, and then take it and take the tips or the end part there and file that down just a bit so it cuts in. And that seems to cut better than a screwdriver bit. It's kind of like if you look at the old Watchmakers drill bits, they were kind of like looked like a roof, like they were a hat, like a roof on the end. And they had cutting on both sides, and they only cut one way. So these carbide drill bits are great, but you got to kind of file the end part so it cuts differently, right? Because you're not going to find pivot drills that are this small. And so these things, I buy them online, and you can buy a set of drill bits various size, and they only cost like $5. So it's probably the best thing to do. And so here I'm just checking the drill bit itself and cleaning off some of the gunk on the end. You're better off like drilling for a few seconds and then pulling it back and then drilling for a few seconds. As far as the drilling speed, I don't think you should be drilling too fast with this bit, because it'll heat up on the end and then it'll break. I spun it a bit fast there, but I didn't break the drill bit, which is nice. So here I'm just looking at the end here, and I think I'm going to clean that up. I got some old Rodico that is pretty dirty, So later on I clean the end of that balance staff up with the Rodico. So here I just making sure that it's getting in there and just turning it by hand on the back of the tailstock. And you can see how that MT3 or whatever you want to call it, taper, holds that drill bit in place nicely. So I had to actually use a rasp, like a file, to make that taper. So I put that drill bit in my lathe and I spun it, and then I used a rasp to start it, and then I took a Dremel tool with a stone on the end, and then used the Dremel tool to make that taper on the on that drill bit. So that's not an easy job. If I could find drill bits that were tapered like that, I'd buy them. So I don't think I know of any other way to grab that drill bit, because they're a bit too big for that shaft, or the push rod, or whatever we're going to call it, right? It's a bit too big for that, so you have to taper it to get it in. And if you want to lock it in, you have to have a taper. So, and it's funny how the taper actually locks it in quite well. So here I'm just playing with it again to make sure I get the right distance and everything's fine, and putting a little bit more cutting oil on it. And you'll see when I move this in, I'm actually moving the tailstock and sliding it towards the part, and then allowing the balance staff to push the drill bit and its holder back, so through the device. And I said before I made a sleeve, or whatever you want to call it, a jobby doohickey sleeve for the inside of that tailstock. That's an 8mm tailstock, so I had an outer diameter of 8mm, an inner diameter of 7mm, and then the device I'm using is 7mm. So to get it all to fit, I had to buy some tubes and put a tube sleeve inside the tailstock to see if it works. So now everything is set and actually working quite well. So I'm just going to spin it here and take some stuff off it. Alright, just so I wouldn't bore myself to death, I sped up this part of the video a bit, so it's going to take less time to get through this. But I just kept cutting and cutting and cutting and putting and looking and cutting and yabba dabba doo and thingamajabby doohicking, and there we go. And just patience as I cut this, slide it back, then empty the hole with using a drill bit. So I did put the drill bit into that hole and then twisted it so I could get the gunge would come out through the swivel on the drill bit, right? So the swirl in the drill bit on the end, so we get the gunk out. And use the Rodico, get back in there tight, tighten the tail stock, and then spin. So this is 3 times faster, so I hope you're not getting dizzy watching it. And then after I got it deep enough, I think, well, I still keep working on it there. And I think at some point my wife came in and asked me a question, and she dropped a book with 3 batteries in it to replace, and there were 1130 batteries, and it was for a kid's book. And she said, "Oh, I know you got these batteries because you're a watchmaker." And I was like, "Yeah, actually I don't." So I ordered them, and $5 are coming tomorrow. There you go, a side story. So I just kept drilling on this thing and testing it and seeing how deep it was. The trickiest part here is that at some point in time you're going to have to give up the drilling, and the hard part is saying, okay, if the pivot's sticking out, if I got 2/3 inside the shaft and 1/3 outside the shaft, you're probably good, right? Because you've got enough strength there. So if it's not like that, then and you don't drill deep enough, then the pivot is going to fall right out. So repivoting means you got to dig deep enough. So it's kind of eyeballing it. If you dig too deep, there is a problem that the drill bit might jam. So here I kind of said, okay, I'm going to take this drill bit and put that hat on it, right? So I just decided I'd flatten it up. So I've got a sheet of diamond. It's diamond. I think it's 2000 grit, and I'm just scraping the darn thing like this to see if that will work any better. Because I couldn't really see any cutting after I made the initial hole, so I wasn't satisfied it was cutting enough. So I just sharpened it up, and then I start going back at the drilling after I sharpen it up to see what I can do. Alright, here I go again. Actually, I sped this video up again too, so you guys wouldn't be bored stiff watching me drill. So I did a ×4 in this video. So back in and out, clean out the gunk, go back, patience, back in again, spin. Oh, that was off a bit. Get it back in, spin, drill the hole deeper. And at some point I actually take that drill bit out and I actually use my hands on the tip of that drill bit to make a better hat on there so it cuts better, right? Because it wasn't cutting better. I'm using pretty old Rodico there. I got to change my Rodico. See, I'm measuring it, so you get the thumb up there. Not too bad, not too shabby, I'd say. All right, here we go again. I sped this up a bit, a little more cutting oil. This time I'm putting it on the balance staff itself because it seems to work well. And there you go. I'm lining that drill up and then allowing the balance staff to actually push the drill back into position. So it just pushes the push rod. And you can see on the far left-hand side as I'm pushing that the push rod through that's got the drill bit. So not sure what that thing is called. I think it is a push rod. So I want to push it in. I don't want to break that drill bit. Then I tighten the back, the tailstock, and I spin away as I do it. So, and then after a while, I said, okay, I need to take this drill out and have a look at this drill bit. And there we go. There it is there, and you can see it's in pretty good condition. But I think at this point here, this is when I really wanted to. There's the tube that I put inside the tailstock. And then the device there, well, I'm not sure what this thing is called, but then it goes inside the 7mm tube. So that's how the whole thing is set and up. And so, and then I tighten it on the top, and it seems to squeeze it enough to keep it in place. So that's cool. I don't even have to drill a hole in it; it just sort of stays in place. There's my ugly Rodico. So I'm going to clean the end off that thing again, and I'm preparing to do some more drilling. But I'm going to take those diamond sheets though and clean off that nasty ugly drill bit, or just take the diamond sheets and make the hat on the drill bit. So it's all good. Just keep going at it and take your time. Alright, now I've got the hole, I believe, deep enough, and I bought this pivot wire, but this pivot wire is way too small. It's okay if you're going to do maybe a watch, but for a pocket watch balance staff, this thing is way too small. So I stuck it into the hole. I'm like, yeah, it started swimming around in there. So I didn't really, that wasn't the right one. So the proper thing to do here was to use a piece of blued steel, the same steel I used to make a balance staff with. But I really need to know what the size of the hole is so I can pick the right piece of blued steel. So to measure the hole size, what I'm going to do, besides wasting my time poking in there, is I've got these gauges. So these are hole gauges. I got a whole set of them here, and as you can see, the sounds on in the background. I don't think my wife came in and did say something to me, but I try a lot of these gauges to see which one fit. So there they are there, and I just push them in and go, oh yeah, that's way too loose. And then I go up another one, and eventually I realize that it's just above 0.40, so just above 0.40 millimeters. And then I got to go find a rod that is that size. So that's the technique. Now I did break one of the ends of those gauges once, sticking it in the jewel, and it bent sideways and snapped the end off. So you can always put those gauges in a lathe and then fix the end and make a new end. You just have to measure it properly and make sure you're not screwing it up. So it's pretty easy, actually. So I just kept working away at going from, I think I started at 0.24 and I worked my way up, and I realized at the end that you know, the darn thing is actually a 0.40 or just plus of 0.40, probably 0.45. But I just kept working my way up patiently until I got the right size. I should have done the Bob Barker and started low and then went super high and then bracketed it until I got my fire correct. So here's it's sort of sitting there in the hole. I also got to see how deep that hole was. It was deeper actually than the hole gauge was, which is, you know, surprising but good, right? So then I found it. See there, it's a 40 or just above a 40. So that's good. Those things are priceless, by the way, those gauges. You need them for doing all kinds of jeweling work and stuff. So here I'm just going to take this piece out, and they're out, and I'm going to use I'm going to put a piece of wire. It's blued steel, so I wouldn't call it pivot wire. It's just very small blued steel. And I'm going to stick the blued steel into the lathe, find the right collet to hold it. And then that blued steel, I need to just have a little bit of its nubby sticking out, so it's perfect. So I get there's my blued steel. I got to pick a really small one. And there's my collets. I'm just trying to fit the collet right, and there we go. There's the blued steel. It's not really good photography there, but I'm sorry. But anyway, I thought it might focus for me. There's the blued steel, and it fits in there perfect. So I just get that in the lathe, and then I push it back and just leave a little bit out. You don't need a lot, because you're going to cut it off. You're going to pull the whole thing out after and then cut it off later. So I'm just kind of easing it out and just make sure it's in there really good. Try to pick a good end if you can get a good end on that. But if you can't, like you can see here, a little bit of lathe noise in the background. If you can't get a good end, you're gonna be filing it flat and then making it good on the end anyway, because you need to be flat basically to get in where the hole is. And if there's any taper in the hole, you got to slide that in. So there's my deuxième gauge, and I'm just measuring the thing. When I measured this, it turned out to be 0.5, exactly at 0.50 millimeters. So I was like, wow, man, that's pretty cool. And I couldn't show you what it was, because when you take it off, the deuxième gauge, it just sort of goes back to 0 again. So it was 0.5 millimeters was the thickness of that. And I had to go to like 0.45 millimeters, so I didn't have to take very much off. So the first thing I do is just flatten this up. I think I used my, I put a little bit of stuff on it here, and I think I had a round graver first, and I said, what the hell am I doing with a round graver? It's got to be a square graver. So when I started graving it, I can't remember whether I showed you the round graver, but I'm adjusting my my graver so it's absolutely the right height. So when I get in there, it's taking off just a bit of material. So what you do, the technique is to remove a little bit of material and then fit the part, and then remove a little more and then fit the part, and remove a little more and then fit the part. So that's how you do it, and this is what I'm up to, where I'm just taking off some of the material to start off with. This is when I think I realized that the graver was actually round on the end and not square. I'm like, what the hell's going on here? So I think I had them in the wrong package. And these are really nice cobard gravers. That's my wait a second mark there. So I said, let's just flatten this, take some material off this thing, flatten it on the end. That's what I really need to do anyway to start off with. So make sure that piece of wire is as flat as heck. I should have done that the first time, but I was trying to get my graver set up first. And then I just took a little bit of the burrs off the edge and then flattened it, and I think I ran it down below too. Just take some dirt off with your finger and then flatten it some more. I've got a very nice control pedal under my desk that I use for the lathe, so I can I forget actually what I'm doing when I'm using that control pedal. I just sort of intuitively know how fast I got to run this thing. And I just, I think that the control pedal is what dentists use. It's a very high-end one. And all I got to do now is say, okay, does this thing fit or not? So I'm going to test fit it, right? And I realize, it's not really fitting. I got to take some more material off. So I'm going to play the game and just remove material, fit, and then continue until you're bored stiff. That's how you do it. So I'll keep this thing running, even though you're probably getting sick of listening to me talk right now. My wife gave me a watch that she has. It's a $12 watch. I've bought her tons of watches, but she keeps wearing this $12 watch, and she says this watch is a real battery eater. It's like she doesn't talk like what's her name from like Chandler Bing. This watch is a really battery eater. She doesn't talk that way. Anyway, so she gave me the watch. I changed the battery on it, and everything's fine. And I'm going to give it back to her, even though I bought her 2 other watches that are gorgeous. She just likes this old watch. This old watch. That sounds like a good TV show. Anyway, I keep working at this, and I'm just peeling off just a little bit of material at a time. You don't be brave, because if you're too brave, you take too much off. You got to start all over again, right? Which is a pain in the Patinsky. But even if I had to start all over again, I could just part that piece of metal off the end and start again. So At least I'm using the right term this time. I didn't say jobby doohickey. I'm parting the metal off with my graver and my tip over tool rest, my tip and Z over tool and Z rest. Yeah, and I think at this point in time, I gotta do a test fit on the thing to make sure I didn't screw myself up here. So there's the hole. See that hole? So that's the drill, the hole I drilled with my new device. So it worked really well. I love the hole. I'm a hole lover. So if I can basically use that device to drill holes like that, then things are perfect. Life is good. LG. And I just need to make sure that the drill bits are sort of like a hat on the end, so they drill properly, and not using the spiral of the drill bit, because that doesn't seem to work. So here I'm just friction fitting it on, and what I did is hold the part and then spin it and see how deep this thing goes on. So that's a good way of doing it. Now I'm not going to leave it in friction fit like this, because I'm going to Loctite that thing in. Just put a little tiny bit of Loctite on that metal. Now when I shove it in later, the Loctite will hold it in place. So, and I used Rodico before to get rid of as much of the oil as possible, so I could actually get it in there properly. This is just a demonstration video right now, because if I was doing this on a real part, I would actually drill the hole, and then after I've drilled the hole, I would clean that hole up with probably lighter fluid and get rid of all of the leftover oil. That's the tip. That's the trick. And you know, when people kind of explain what they meant, and they say, what I really meant was, well, I don't want to explain it. So you just need to clean it up. You can probably use alcohol as well, but I like using lighter fluid because it just gets rid of everything. So that's how I'm friction fitting it. I just changed my camera angle so you can see that. There's the Loctite. So I put the Loctite on, and what I do is I take the Loctite and I put it on a toothpick. And then I take the toothpick and I rub that shaft. And see there, we get the Loctite, and just put a little tiny bit on a toothpick. And then I'm going to take that toothpick and transfer that to the shaft. Just a bit of Loctite. You don't need much, because this part would likely just fit our friction fit in anyway, right? And remembering that the balance is squeezed between two jewels on the upper and lower jewel anyway, so that pivot ain't going anywhere once it's in there. So there's no place for it to just pop out. So you need to fit it in, and the reason why you're trying to fit it in tight is so you can actually use your graver to form the pivot after you're finished this. So here I'm just going to spin this in, and just to see how deep this thing will go. Actually, it was pretty good. I did drill the hole deep enough. And again, if you drill the hole too deep, you'll snap your drill, and then you'll have a drill stuck inside the shaft, right? And I've done that before, and then you try to pick the thing out, and it's impossible. Anyone who's watching this video who's done watchwork before has split their drill inside the shaft and gone, holy bleep 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 bleep. So here I'm using a staking set, and just to make sure I've got this thing as deep as it can go. And so I put the stake over the balance. Speaking of steak, that's what I'm having for dinner tonight. So I put the stake over the balance, and then I just tap that in. Tap, tap, tap. I'm tapping that lightly, but you know, see how it's going in? Well, that's the shaft on the other side decided to take a ride. So, so it went in on me a bit, right? So now I've taken the pivot, and the wire, the whole wire is out there. I didn't realize I didn't have the camera on, but all you do is take the whole thing out and then clip it, right? Like snap it off, and snap it off, you know, just forward of where you would be forming the pivot on this, right? So here I'm trying to hold it properly while I'm snapping it off. Just move the camera back so you can see what I'm up to. So I want to hold the wire with 2 fingers, and then hold the balance with the other 2 fingers. That way things are not going to go flying. And there, now I've got the pivot, and it's formed on the end, as you can see. Look at that baby, man. Look at that baby. It's a piece of work. So that's stuck in the hole. There it is there. And now I've got a wire that I just can grave down into being a pivot again, which is kind of cool. So I fit the balance back into the balance shaft back into the lathe here, but I flip it so the good pivot is on the inside in the collet, right? So I'm just grabbing that. Just happened to use the exact same collet, and that worked. So So I tighten that up, and now I've got myself a pivot on the end. And now I've got to basically part the pivot on the end. So I think I smoothened it out a bit, but that was probably a waste of time. Because all I really need to do is get that tool rest up there and part that piece off and get rid of the majority of it. Make sure you don't hit the balance with your tool rest like I just did, by the way. So again, this is not this is just a trial. It's not a good balance. I'd be taking more care, but I didn't damage anything anyway. And so here I'm just going to try parting this this piece of metal off here, and use my square 2mm carbide graver. I was going to say graphite carver, whatever it is. Anyway, so I'm just taking material off the end here, and then I'm going to start parting it, spinning it and parting it. So when I'm parting it, I usually like using an oval or round tipped graver. So it's basically showing about probably about 90 to 100 degrees. That's how much showing to the piece of metal that you're cutting. And then that round tip doesn't seem to get jammed in when you're trying to part, which is nice. So, and normally a parting goes from wide to narrow, a parting device. So, but I find if I just go at an angle at this thing, it still does the job because it's so small. And normally I'd also wait until that Loctite basically tightened up. So I would leave that overnight. But I wanted to complete this video, so I said, oh, what the heck. It's still pretty friction fitted in there, so there's no real problem. So I just kept working at parting this thing, and I got it down to the point where I could just take my my pinchers there, my pliers, and grab the end and just pull it out, or just bend it off. So, and that part, like I said, that part's staying in place. You just have to make sure it's well seated in, like when I tapped it with the hammer. That's well seated in that hole, because once you put that shaft in there, see, I'm just going to bend this off a bit. Once you put the part in, like the balance, or if it's a gear or whatever, it's going to be, you know, staying in place anyway, because it's between two jewels, upper and lower, and there's really nowhere for it to shake out. So even if that thing got loose a little bit, it wouldn't matter, because it's you know, there's more friction there than would be on the jewel once you have the part. So now I didn't bother, you know, completing the pivot in this video, because I would just have to go in and cut the pivot. But I would wait till that dried overnight anyway, and I'd cut the pivot after and do the whole thing I do when I make a balance staff. And but what this is telling me is that I can take an existing balance for someone's watch, measure the distance, and I can do an attempt at repivoting, and it doesn't hurt the balance or anything, because you either repivot it or you have to punch the balance staff out and make a brand new balance staff or buy one. So if I can repivot with blued steel, it's doing exactly the same as if I were to make a balance staff. There's almost no difference. And repivoting is what watchmakers did 100 years ago. So just to save time and use the exact same balance staff. So it's a pretty cool thing, because most of the time the damage on a balance staff is just the pivot breaking through shock, because they didn't have the Inca block shock systems back then. So there's me moving my camera around, there's all kinds of crap showing.